The way someone treats a child often reveals more about their character than a lifetime of speeches ever could. Snow drifted gently beyond the towering windows of the Whitmore estate as Christmas music floated through the grand ballroom. Golden lights wrapped around massive trees. Crystal ornaments sparkled beneath elegant chandeliers. Guests dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns moved between tables decorated with silver ribbons and holiday centerpieces. It was the annual Whitmore Christmas Gala, one of the most exclusive holiday events in Chicago. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists filled the room. Yet among the hundreds of guests, very few noticed Emma Collins. At 29 years old, Emma had learned how easily people overlooked those wearing a waitress uniform. She moved quietly through the ballroom carrying trays, refilling drinks, and helping guests with polite professionalism. Tonight's shift mattered more than most. Christmas was only 3 days away, and every extra dollar would help. Her 3-year-old son Noah sat near a staff area beside one of the enormous Christmas trees. Emma had no family available to watch him. She could not afford a babysitter. Fortunately, the event manager had agreed to let Noah stay nearby as long as he remained close to the staff section. Noah had spent most of the evening staring at the decorations in amazement. To him, the estate looked less like a house and more like something from a storybook. Every few minutes he pointed at another ornament or blinking light. Emma smiled each time she caught him looking around with wide blue eyes. The excitement in his face made the long hours feel worthwhile. Across the ballroom, attention focused on Ethan Whitmore and his fiancée Vanessa Reed. Vanessa moved confidently through the crowd, greeting guests and accepting compliments as though she already owned the estate. Elegant, beautiful, perfectly composed. She enjoyed being noticed. More importantly, she expected to be noticed. Near the center of the ballroom stood a Christmas display where small wrapped gifts had been arranged beneath one of the largest trees. Most guests assumed the packages were decorative. Few paid them much attention. Noah, however, noticed one immediately. A small red box wrapped with a silver ribbon sat near the edge of the display. Attached to it was a handwritten card. The package looked different from the others, more personal somehow. Noah stared at it for several minutes before a smiling, elderly staff member approached him. "Merry Christmas, young man," the employee said kindly. "That one is for you." Noah blinked in surprise. "For me?" The employee nodded. "Yes." Carefully, Noah picked up the gift. The box was small enough for him to hold with both hands. His entire face lit up. He looked toward Emma. "Mom." Emma turned and immediately saw the excitement in her son's eyes. Her heart melted. Christmas had been difficult this year. Money was tight. She worried constantly about giving Noah the holiday he deserved. Seeing him smile like that felt like a gift itself. Several nearby guests noticed the moment and smiled. The sight of a little boy receiving a Christmas present brought warmth to the room. But not everyone shared the feeling. As Noah hugged the gift against his chest, Vanessa Reed happened to notice him. She stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She looked at the wrapped box, then at the child holding it, then at the waitress uniform Emma was wearing across the room. Slowly, she walked toward them. Noah never saw her coming. He was too busy admiring the silver ribbon. Emma sensed the change immediately. Something in Vanessa's expression made her uneasy. The music continued. Guests continued talking. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. Yet within seconds, the atmosphere around Noah changed completely. Vanessa stopped directly in front of him. Her smile disappeared. Then, in full view of the surrounding guests, she reached down toward the Christmas gift in Noah's hands. Vanessa Reed's hand closed around the small red gift box before Noah fully understood what was happening. The little boy blinked in confusion as the package disappeared from his arms. For a moment, he simply stared at her. The silver ribbon that had made him smile seconds earlier now rested in someone else's hands. Nearby conversations began to fade as guests noticed the interaction. Vanessa examined the card attached to the gift. Her expression hardened. "This does not belong here," she said calmly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried far enough for several nearby guests to hear. Noah looked up at her. "That is my Christmas present." Vanessa offered a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "I do not think so." Emma had already started walking toward them. Every instinct told her something was wrong. She reached Noah's side just as Vanessa removed the card from the package and looked at it again. "There must be some mistake," Vanessa said. "These gifts are for invited family guests." Noah's small shoulders slumped. He looked at the floor, then at the box, then at his mother. Emma immediately understood what had happened. The pain on her son's face hit harder than any insult directed toward herself ever could. Yet she remained calm. "Excuse me," Emma said politely. One of the staff members gave that to him. Vanessa glanced at Emma's uniform. Her eyes lingered briefly on the apron before returning to the gift. "I am sure someone made an error." Emma could feel guests beginning to watch. The room had not stopped entirely, but attention was shifting. People were listening now. Noah gently tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" The question broke her heart. She knelt beside him immediately. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." Vanessa crossed her arms lightly. "The issue is not the child." Her tone suggested otherwise. "The issue is that certain items are intended for specific guests." Emma rose slowly. Every person around them seemed to expect an argument, expected anger, expected embarrassment. Instead, Emma remained composed. "If there has been a misunderstanding, I am sure it can be sorted out." Vanessa nodded. "Exactly." Then she handed the gift to a nearby event assistant. "Please return this to the display." Noah watched the box disappear. The excitement that had filled his face only minutes earlier vanished completely. Around the ballroom, a few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked away. Others continued watching. Nobody stepped forward. Emma felt the weight of every eye in the room. Yet she refused to let Noah see her frustration. Christmas had already been difficult enough. She would not allow this moment to become something he remembered with shame. Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought Santa sent it." Emma swallowed hard. Then she smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Christmas is not about one gift." The words sounded stronger than she felt. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore had noticed the disturbance but was occupied speaking with donors. He could not hear the details. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed satisfied that the situation had been resolved. She adjusted her dress, smiled at several nearby guests, and prepared to move on. To her, the matter was closed. To Noah, it was not. The little boy stared toward the display where the gift had been returned. Snow continued falling outside the massive windows. Christmas music drifted through the ballroom. Yet the holiday magic that had filled his eyes only minutes earlier was gone. Emma gently took his hand. "Come on, sweetheart." Noah nodded quietly. Together, they began walking away from the Christmas tree. Neither noticed the elderly man seated at the far end of the ballroom. Arthur Whitmore had witnessed every second of the exchange. And unlike everyone else in the room, he was paying attention not to the gift that had been taken away, but to the dignity of the woman who had refused to fight for it. Emma led Noah toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, near one of the towering windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. The Christmas lights reflected softly across the glass, casting warm colors across the polished floor. Around them, guests continued enjoying the evening. Servers moved between tables. Laughter rose from small groups gathered near the fireplace. A string quartet played holiday music near the center of the room. To most people, the interruption had already become a forgotten moment. To Noah, it had not. The little boy climbed onto a chair beside the window and stared at the falling snow. His small hands rested in his lap. The excitement that had filled him earlier was gone. Emma recognized that silence. It was the silence of a child trying to understand disappointment. She sat beside him and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Noah thought for a moment. "I think so." The answer sounded brave. Too brave for someone so young. Emma smiled sadly. "You do not have to pretend." Noah looked down. "I really thought it was mine." Emma felt her heart tighten. She wished she could erase the moment completely. Wished she could protect him from every unfair thing he would ever experience. But life rarely offered that kind of protection. Instead, she took his hand. "Sometimes people make mistakes." Noah nodded slowly. "The lady thought I should not have it." Emma searched for the right words. "Sometimes people think they know everything about someone when they really do not know them at all." Noah considered that carefully. Then he looked back toward the giant Christmas tree. The red gift box was still sitting beneath the branches, untouched, waiting. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Reed continued greeting guests. Her confidence appeared completely restored. Several people complimented her holiday dress. Others discussed wedding plans with her. She smiled easily, unaware that a pair of elderly eyes continued watching her from across the room. Arthur Whitmore sat alone near the fireplace. At 78 years old, the Whitmore family patriarch rarely spoke unnecessarily. Decades of success had taught him the value of observation. He had spent most of the evening quietly listening while others competed for attention. But what he had witnessed near the Christmas tree continued bothering him. Not because of the gift itself. The box was insignificant. What troubled him was the way Emma had responded. Most people in her position would have argued. Some would have demanded an explanation. Others might have tried to embarrass Vanessa in return. Emma had done none of those things. Instead, she protected her son's dignity. Arthur respected that, more than anyone realized. He glanced toward Noah sitting by the window. The little boy was now drawing shapes in the condensation on the glass. Every so often he looked toward the Christmas tree and then quickly looked away. Arthur's expression softened. Nearby, Ethan Whitmore finally approached his grandfather's table. "Everything all right?" Ethan asked. Arthur nodded slowly. "Tell me something." Ethan pulled out a chair. "What?" Arthur gestured subtly toward Emma and Noah. "Who are they?" Ethan followed his gaze. "One of the event staff members and her son, I believe." Arthur remained silent for several seconds. "And the gift?" Ethan looked confused. "What gift?" Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. "Exactly." Across the ballroom, Emma checked the time on her phone. Another 2 hours remained in her shift. She stood and adjusted her apron. "I need to get back to work." Noah nodded. "I will stay right here." Emma kissed the top of his head. "Good." Then she smiled. "And remember something." Noah looked up. "What?" Emma's voice remained calm and steady. "Christmas is not about what someone takes away from you. It is about what nobody can take from you." Noah smiled faintly. He did not fully understand the lesson yet, but Arthur Whitmore did. And as he watched Emma return to work with quiet grace, he made a decision. Before this evening ended, he intended to find out exactly why that little red gift had been placed under the tree in the first place. Arthur Whitmore spent the next 20 minutes watching the ballroom with unusual focus. The Christmas gala continued exactly as it always did. Guests discussed investments. Donors exchanged business cards. Holiday music floated through the estate. Servers moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of desserts and sparkling drinks. Yet Arthur's attention repeatedly returned to two people, Emma Collins and her son Noah. The more he watched them, the more unsettled he became. Not because they had done anything wrong, because they had done everything right. Noah remained by the window exactly where his mother had asked him to stay. Occasionally, he drew pictures on a napkin. Sometimes he watched the snowfall outside. Other times he simply sat quietly, behaving better than many of the adults in the room. Emma continued working without complaint. She smiled at guests, refilled glasses, cleared tables. Nobody looking at her would guess that her son had just experienced one of the most disappointing moments of his young life. Arthur respected that kind of strength. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Reed remained completely unaware of the impression she had left. She laughed with guests, accepted compliments, discussed wedding plans with several members of Chicago society. To her, the incident near the Christmas tree had been insignificant. A minor correction, a misunderstanding she believed she had handled appropriately. Arthur disagreed, strongly. Finally, he motioned for one of the senior event coordinators to approach his table. The woman arrived moments later. "Mr. Whitmore," she said politely, "is everything all right?" Arthur nodded. "I have a question." The coordinator smiled. "Of course." Arthur pointed subtly toward the large Christmas tree, the red gift box with the silver ribbon. The coordinator immediately recognized the package. "Yes." Arthur leaned back in his chair. "Who placed it there?" The coordinator looked surprised by the question. "You did." Arthur remained silent. "Explain." The woman blinked. "Last week you personally reviewed the Christmas gifts for the event." Arthur's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The memory was beginning to return. Every year, he prepared several anonymous gifts for people who often went unnoticed during the holidays. Employees, maintenance staff, event workers, families facing difficult circumstances. It had become a private tradition, one very few people knew about. The coordinator continued. "You selected that particular gift yourself." Arthur looked toward Noah. "And who was it intended for?" The coordinator smiled softly. "The little boy." Arthur sat very still. Around him, conversations continued. But suddenly, every piece of the evening clicked into place. The gift had not been misplaced. It had not been assigned incorrectly. It had never belonged to anyone else. It had been meant for Noah from the very beginning. Arthur's expression darkened slightly. Who informed the child that the gift was his? One of our senior staff members. Arthur nodded. Good. The coordinator hesitated before speaking again. May I ask why? Arthur glanced toward the window where Noah sat quietly watching snowflakes drift through the darkness. Because children remember Christmas. His voice was calm. Sometimes for the rest of their lives. The coordinator followed his gaze. Her expression softened immediately. She had witnessed the earlier incident herself. Arthur slowly rose from his chair. At 78, his movements were deliberate rather than quick. Yet there was something unmistakable in his posture now. Purpose. Nearby guests noticed immediately. The Whitmore patriarch rarely left his table during events. When he did, people paid attention. Across the room, Ethan spotted his grandfather standing. Vanessa noticed as well. Neither understood why. Arthur thanked the coordinator and began walking toward the center of the ballroom. The Christmas tree glowed beneath thousands of lights. The red gift box remained beneath its branches exactly where it had been returned. Arthur stopped beside it. For a moment, he simply looked at the package. Then he picked it up. Conversations began fading one by one. Guests turned. Heads lifted. Even the musicians seemed to notice the change in atmosphere. Near the window, Noah looked up curiously. Emma froze while carrying a tray across the room. And for the first time that evening, Arthur Whitmore was ready to ask a question that would change everything. The ballroom grew quieter with every step Arthur Whitmore took toward the center of the room. At 78 years old, he no longer needed to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone was enough. Conversations faded. Guests turned toward him. The musicians lowered their instruments. Even the staff paused briefly to see what the Whitmore patriarch intended to do. Arthur stood beside the towering Christmas tree with the small red gift box resting in his hands. The silver ribbon reflected the warm holiday lights. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore exchanged a confused glance with Vanessa Reed. Neither had expected this interruption. Emma remained frozen beside a service table, a tray still balanced carefully in her hands. Noah watched from his chair near the window. The little boy did not understand why everyone suddenly seemed focused on the same gift he had held earlier. Arthur looked around the ballroom slowly. Decades of leadership had taught him how to read a room. Tonight, he saw curiosity, confusion, anticipation. Then he asked a single question. Who removed this gift from the child it was intended for? The silence that followed felt immediate and absolute. No one moved. No one answered. Arthur's voice had not been angry. That somehow made the question even more powerful. Ethan stepped forward first. Grandfather, what is going on? Arthur looked at him calmly. I asked a question. Vanessa shifted slightly beside Ethan. Several guests glanced in her direction. The discomfort in the room was becoming impossible to ignore. Arthur held up the gift box. This package was selected personally. His eyes moved across the crowd. Very personally. The event coordinator who had spoken with him earlier stepped forward. That is correct, Mr. Whitmore. Arthur nodded. And was this gift placed under the tree by mistake? The coordinator answered immediately. No. Arthur looked around the room once more. Was it assigned to the wrong person? No. Several guests exchanged surprised looks. Ethan's expression changed. He was beginning to realize that something significant had happened without his knowledge. Arthur's gaze finally settled on Vanessa. Not harsh, not accusatory, simply direct. Then perhaps someone can explain why a child was told he did not belong. Vanessa's confidence faltered for the first time that evening. I believed there had been an error. Arthur listened quietly. You believed. Vanessa nodded. The gift appeared to be reserved for family guests. Arthur remained silent for several seconds. The pause felt longer than it actually was. Then he spoke. And what made you assume the child was not worthy of receiving it? Vanessa blinked. The question struck deeper than she expected. Around the ballroom, guests waited for her answer. Emma lowered her eyes. She wanted no part of a public confrontation. She wanted only to finish her shift and take Noah home. Yet events were no longer under her control. Noah looked toward his mother. Mom. Emma offered a small reassuring smile. Arthur noticed. So did several guests nearby. Even now, Emma seemed more concerned about protecting her son than defending herself. Arthur respected that more than words could express. He turned toward the crowd once again. Many years ago, he said quietly, my father taught me something about Christmas. The room remained silent. He told me that the true measure of character is not how we treat important people. Arthur's eyes briefly found Noah sitting alone by the window. It is how we treat those who expect nothing from us. The words settled heavily over the ballroom. Vanessa lowered her gaze. Ethan stood motionless. Emma felt tears threatening to form. Arthur looked down at the gift in his hands, then back toward Noah. The little boy was watching him carefully, waiting, hoping. And for the first time all evening, the Whitmore patriarch smiled, because he had finally decided exactly what needed to happen next. Arthur Whitmore began walking across the ballroom. The movement was slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Every guest watched. Every conversation remained suspended. Even the musicians seemed reluctant to break the silence. In Arthur's hands rested the small red gift box wrapped with a silver ribbon. Under the glow of thousands of Christmas lights, it suddenly seemed far more important than anyone had imagined. Noah slid carefully off his chair near the window. His blue eyes followed Arthur's every step. Emma stood frozen beside a service station. Part of her wanted the attention to end. Another part could not look away. Arthur stopped directly in front of the little boy. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the elderly man lowered himself slowly to one knee. A collective breath moved through the ballroom. The Whitmore patriarch rarely knelt for anyone. Noah stared at him with quiet curiosity. Arthur smiled warmly. "Hello, young man." Noah smiled back. "Hi." A few guests chuckled softly. Arthur lifted the gift box slightly. "I believe this belongs to you." Noah's eyes widened. He glanced immediately toward his mother. Emma felt emotion rise in her chest. She nodded gently. "It is okay, sweetheart." Noah looked back at Arthur. "Really?" Arthur nodded. "Really?" Then he placed the gift carefully into Noah's hands. The little boy accepted it as though it were something fragile and precious. Not because of what was inside, because someone had finally told him he was allowed to have it. Around the ballroom, several guests smiled. Others lowered their eyes, quietly reflecting on what they had witnessed. Arthur remained kneeling. "Do you know why I chose that gift?" Noah shook his head. Arthur glanced briefly toward Emma. "Because every Christmas, I try to remember people who helped make this evening possible." Noah listened carefully. Arthur continued. "Your mother has worked hard tonight. Very hard." Emma immediately felt embarrassed by the attention. Arthur smiled. "And I noticed something else." Noah tilted his head. "What?" Arthur's eyes softened. "I noticed that she is raising a very polite young man." A ripple of warmth moved through the room. Noah smiled proudly. Emma pressed a hand against her heart. Across the ballroom, Ethan watched quietly. He had never seen his grandfather speak this way at a gala. Vanessa stood beside him, unusually silent. Arthur slowly rose to his feet. Then he addressed the room. "Many people spend Christmas searching for expensive gifts." His voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. "But the most valuable things are often much smaller." He looked toward Noah. "Kindness, gratitude, character." No one interrupted. Arthur continued. "Tonight, a child received a gift, then lost it. Not because of anything he did." The words settled heavily over the crowd. Vanessa lowered her gaze. Arthur did not mention her name. He did not need to. "The lesson is simple," he said. "Before deciding who belongs, we should first remember what Christmas is supposed to mean." The silence that followed felt different now. Softer, more thoughtful. Then Arthur smiled again and looked at Noah. "Go ahead." Noah looked down at the gift. Carefully, he untied the silver ribbon. The room seemed to lean forward together. Emma found herself holding her breath. Inside the box was a beautifully crafted wooden music box. Delicate carvings of snowflakes covered its surface. Noah opened the lid. A gentle Christmas melody immediately filled the air. The sound was simple, beautiful, timeless. Noah's face lit up brighter than any decoration in the ballroom. Guests smiled. Some quietly applauded. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because of the gift itself, because for the first time that evening, her son looked happy again. And standing nearby, Arthur Whitmore realized that the best part of Christmas had never been giving presents. It was restoring something that should never have been taken away in the first place. The gentle melody from the wooden music box lingered in the ballroom long after the final note faded. For a few moments, nobody seemed eager to speak. The simple tune had accomplished something speeches and status never could. It reminded everyone why they were gathered there in the first place. Christmas was supposed to bring people together. Noah carefully closed the lid and held the gift against his chest. The smile on his face seemed brighter than the thousands of lights decorating the estate. Arthur Whitmore watched him with quiet satisfaction. Then he turned toward Emma. "Miss Collins." Emma immediately straightened. "Yes, sir." Arthur smiled warmly. "Would you join me for a moment?" Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Emma felt uncomfortable with attention. She had spent years avoiding it. Yet refusing Arthur in front of everyone felt impossible. She walked slowly toward him, still wearing her navy waitress apron. The contrast between her simple uniform and the luxury surrounding her could not have been greater. Yet somehow she carried herself with more grace than many of the guests dressed in designer clothing. Arthur waited until she stood beside him. Then he addressed the room again. "This evening, many people have praised generosity." His gaze moved across the crowd. They have spoken about donations, business success, and philanthropy. He paused briefly. "Those things matter." The guests listened carefully. Arthur continued, "But I have always believed that character matters more." The room remained silent. Arthur looked toward Emma. Earlier tonight, this young mother was embarrassed in front of a room full of strangers. Emma lowered her eyes slightly. Arthur's voice remained calm. Yet she never raised her voice, never demanded special treatment, never tried to humiliate anyone in return. Several guests nodded quietly. They had witnessed the same thing. Arthur smiled. That kind of dignity is rare. Emma felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Across the ballroom, Ethan Whitmore watched the exchange with growing admiration. The more he observed Emma, the more he understood what his grandfather had seen. Strength without arrogance. Grace without performance. Nearby, Vanessa stood quietly. No one was attacking her. No one was insulting her. Yet for perhaps the first time that evening, she seemed to understand the consequences of her actions. Arthur did not mention her name. He simply continued. "Sometimes people assume that importance comes from wealth." He glanced toward Noah. "Sometimes they assume it comes from status." Then he smiled. "I disagree." Arthur turned fully toward Emma. "Importance comes from how we treat people when nobody expects us to be kind." The words settled over the room like snowfall. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because she had been praised, because someone had finally noticed. Not her job, not her circumstances, her effort, her love for her son, her determination to protect his happiness even when her own heart was hurting. Arthur reached into his suit jacket and removed a small envelope. He handed it to Emma. She accepted it carefully. "What is this?" she asked softly. Arthur smiled. "A Christmas gift." Emma immediately shook her head. "Sir, that is not necessary." Arthur chuckled gently. "Perhaps." Then his expression softened. "But kindness should never go unnoticed." Noah looked up at his mother. Emma opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten card. She read the first line and suddenly covered her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. Because the gift was not money. It was something far more meaningful. And as the room waited to discover what Arthur Whitmore had written, even Vanessa realized that the evening was no longer about a Christmas present. It was about the value of a person that so many had failed to see. Emma stared at the handwritten card inside the envelope while the ballroom waited. Her hands trembled slightly. For a moment, she could not speak. The first line alone was enough to overwhelm her. Arthur Whitmore watched patiently. He had seen that reaction before. Genuine gratitude always looked different from surprise. It carried weight. It carried history. Emma finally lifted her eyes. "You remembered." Arthur smiled softly. "Of course I remembered." Several guests exchanged curious glances. Ethan stepped closer. "Remembered what?" Arthur folded his hands in front of him. 3 years ago, during a winter storm, one of my drivers became stranded outside a diner on the north side of the city. Emma immediately recognized the story. Arthur continued. The roads were closing. Temperatures were dropping. Most businesses had already stopped serving customers. The room remained silent. One young waitress stayed after her shift ended and helped several stranded travelers until they were safely on their way. Emma lowered her eyes. She had never spoken about that night. To her, it had simply been the right thing to do. Arthur smiled. "One of those travelers was my driver." Ethan looked surprised. Vanessa looked equally stunned. Arthur continued. "When he returned, he told me about a young woman who refused every offer of compensation. He said she only asked whether everyone had made it home safely." Emma felt tears filling her eyes again. She remembered the storm. She remembered the exhausted travelers. She remembered worrying about Noah, and still choosing to stay until everyone was safe. Arthur gestured toward the card. I never forgot the name he gave me. Emma looked down at the handwritten message. Beneath Arthur's signature was a simple note. Thank you for choosing kindness when nobody was watching. The words hit harder than any amount of money ever could. Around the ballroom, several guests seemed visibly moved. Arthur turned toward the crowd. This evening, many people met Emma Collins for the first time. He paused. I met her years ago through the impact of her actions. Ethan looked at Emma differently now, not as a member of the staff, as a person, as someone whose character had already earned his grandfather's respect long before this night. Arthur smiled toward Noah, and judging by her son, she has continued making the same choices. Noah hugged his music box proudly. Several guests laughed softly. The tension that had filled the room earlier had completely transformed. Warmth replaced discomfort. Understanding replaced judgment. Even Vanessa seemed unable to look away. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing Emma beyond the uniform. Arthur reached into his jacket once more and removed a second folded paper. There is one more thing. Emma looked confused. Arthur handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. Her eyes widened immediately. It was a scholarship fund established in Noah's name. Not for today, not for tomorrow, for his future education. Emma looked up in complete disbelief. Arthur's voice remained gentle. Christmas gifts should last longer than a season. The ballroom erupted into applause. Not loud or theatrical. Genuine. Heartfelt. Noah looked around in confusion before smiling because everyone else was smiling. Emma could barely speak through her tears. Arthur simply nodded. Because the evening had never been about rescuing someone. It had been about recognizing someone who had already been extraordinary all along. The applause gradually faded, but the feeling it created remained. Guests returned to their conversations more slowly than before, as though none of them wanted the moment to end. Snow continued falling beyond the towering windows. Christmas lights reflected across the polished ballroom floor. Yet the atmosphere felt different now. Warmer, lighter, more honest. Emma still held the scholarship papers in her hands. She had read them 3 times and still struggled to believe they were real. Every parent carries private worries, questions they rarely speak aloud. Emma had spent years wondering how she would provide every opportunity Noah deserved. Tonight, without asking for help, one of those fears had quietly disappeared. Noah stood beside her holding the wooden music box. Every few minutes he opened it just enough to hear a few notes before closing it again with a smile. Arthur Whitmore watched him and laughed softly. I think he likes it. Noah nodded immediately. A lot. The room laughed with him. Arthur reached down and gently adjusted the silver ribbon that still hung from the box. Good. Then he looked toward Emma. The best gifts are the ones people remember. Emma's eyes filled again. Thank you. Arthur shook his head. No. His voice remained calm. Thank you. She looked confused. Arthur smiled. People spend years telling me what success looks like. Very few remind me what character looks like. Emma lowered her eyes. She did not know how to respond to that. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore finally approached. He extended his hand toward Emma. I owe you an apology. Emma looked surprised. Ethan smiled politely. I should have paid closer attention tonight. Emma accepted the handshake. You do not owe me anything. Ethan glanced toward Noah. I think perhaps I do. Nearby, Vanessa stood quietly. The confidence that had defined her earlier had been replaced by reflection. After several moments, she slowly approached Emma. The ballroom seemed to notice immediately. Emma remained calm. Vanessa stopped in front of her. For a second, neither woman spoke. Then Vanessa took a breath. I was wrong. The words were simple, honest. Emma listened. Vanessa glanced toward Noah. I made an assumption I should not have made. Noah looked up from his music box. Vanessa smiled sadly. I am sorry. The little boy considered her words carefully. Then he nodded. Okay. The innocence of his answer dissolved the last remaining tension in the room. Arthur smiled. Sometimes children accomplished what adults could not. The evening eventually began winding down. Guests collected coats. Valets prepared cars. Holiday music played softly near the entrance. Emma's shift was finally over. She helped Noah into his winter coat, while he carefully protected both the music box and the scholarship envelope as though they were treasures. In many ways, they were. Outside, the cold Chicago air greeted them as they stepped onto the estate's front steps. Snowflakes drifted beneath glowing lanterns. Arthur, Ethan and several members of the Whitmore family stood nearby, saying goodbye. Noah suddenly turned back toward Arthur. "Merry Christmas." Arthur smiled. "Merry Christmas, young man." Emma looked at the elderly patriarch one final time. "You changed our Christmas." Arthur shook his head gently. Then he looked toward Noah. "No." His eyes softened. "He changed ours." Emma glanced down at her son. The little boy smiled beneath the falling snow, holding his gift close to his chest. And in that quiet moment, everyone understood the same truth. The smallest gifts often reveal the biggest truths about people. Not what they own, not who they know, but who they choose to be when kindness costs nothing and means everything.